Hello, my name is John Pilger. My film, The Coming War on China, is the most urgent film I made because it talks about something that the news doesn't. It's about the real possibility of a war between two nuclear powers, the United States and China.
Okay, that was John Pilger at the very top, a promo that he did way back in 2016, 17, when his movie, The Coming War on China, opened up at some theater. And after that, of course, was The Third Man. By the way, I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom. Today, we are going to do something on Assange at the end of the show, a last segment, but this is about John Pilger. This is a show about John Pilger's films. Now, John Pilger is in a league of his own as a journalist, as an author, as a writer, as a war correspondent, and a filmmaker. This, I hope, is the first of a 4 or 5 part series looking at his film career. He's got 61 films that he's made. The first one was The Quiet Mutiny about Vietnam, and the other, The Coming War on China. And we're going to talk to him about both of those films. And then we'll talk about Julian Assange in a last segment. Now, like I said, there's nobody like John Pilger. His documentaries, by the way, films, they're both, you can see on his website, which is johnpilger.com. And I recommend that you do that. Forget about Netflix, forget about Amazon Prime. This is free. You can watch 61 brilliant films, flawless films right there, and be educated and entertained simultaneously. So I recommend that you do that, johnpilger.com, and just go through one after the other. You'll be binge watching, trust me. The first one we're going to talk about will be the Quiet Mutiny about Vietnam, and then the Coming War on China. Now, I'm not going to be able to play so much of it during the interview because I want to talk to John, but so I'm going to play one of the excerpts from the Coming War on China right now, because it is a brilliant hour and 52-minute film. And there's so much to it. And it's historical. It talks about US involvement there, and the opium trade, and, every country raping China. So people don't know the history of China. You'll get it here. And so I'm going to play one segment right now. And it's like, it shows you the history. This really startled me. I did not know about this. And this is something about Franklin Roosevelt and where his family made their fortune. It's all about China. So dig this. We'll be right back.
For the American elite in the 19th century, China was a gold mine of drugs.
Warren Delano, the grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the American opium king of China. He was the biggest American opium dealer, second to the British. He welcomed the first American ship into China to help out with the opium wars. Much of the east coast of America, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, were born from opium money. The American Industrial Revolution was funded by huge pools of money. Where did this come from? It came from illegal drugs in the biggest market in the world, China.
Let me get this right. The grandfather of arguably the most liberal president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a drug runner.
Yes, sir. Franklin Delano Roosevelt never made much money in his life. He had public service jobs that were very lowly paid, but he had yachts, he had summer homes, he had mansions in New York City. The kids went to private schools. He inherited a fortune from Warren Delano, his father, who was the American opium king of China. If you scratch anyone with the name Forbes in their name, John Forbes Kerry, Secretary of State John Forbes Kerry.
That's the present Secretary of State.
Yes, sir. You'll find opium money. His great-grandfather was an opium dealer. How big was opium money? Opium money built the first industrial city in the United States, Lowell, Massachusetts. It built the first 5 railroads in the United States. Opium money all over the East Coast, but it wasn't talked about. It was called the China trade.
Okay, it's really startling, as I said, shocking. But you got to see this film. You got to see all of them. It's like, which one do you choose? We chose 2 today. We'll do more in the future. It's like, 61 flawless films, and it's like Beethoven. Which one do you choose out of the 9? Or Shakespeare? Which one do you choose out of all of his plays? So that's the dilemma that you have when you go to johnpilger.com and take a look at his documentaries. All right, we're going to get right into it. We're going to play a little music and come right back with Mr. Pilger, who is coming to us from Sydney, Australia.
I hadn't been to Vietnam for 3 years. The war, after all, is a bore, so why go back? What is there left to say? Surely we've seen it all on telly. But our boredom has not made the war go away, so I've come back for the final act. No blood, no atrocities, just the rejection of the war by those sent here to fight it. Just the quiet mutiny of the greatest army in history. This is Snuffy, some 8 miles from the Cambodian border, in a wilderness of jungle and mud controlled by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. Snuffy is a beleaguered fort, defended by the 1st Air Cavalry Division. The scene there looks so familiar, like a faded snapshot of another war we wish to forget half a century ago, with its trenches and mud and barbed wire and boredom and young men and their puppies. Snuffy is important because it's the end of the line for the grunts. They are the 18-year-old drafted kids, the national servicemen on whom the entire army depends. They are the ones to whom the buck has finally passed, from the president and the Pentagon and the career men who catch colds in their air-conditioned command posts. Out of 400,000 American soldiers in Vietnam, only 80,000 fight, and almost all of them are grunts. The grunts in 1970 are a very different kind of American foot soldier. They are mostly from a world unknown to their commanders. They are the graduates of an American rebellion that stemmed from the war they have been sent here to fight. And quietly but massively they have brought that rebellion with them here to Vietnam. For the grunts are unraveling the very fabric of the military. They are growing their hair, wearing love beads, smoking pot, flourishing the V-sign of peace. And some are refusing to fight. The young men you see in this film are not a selected, griping minority. I've spoken to hundreds of young soldiers, and the rebellion they feel so deeply is everywhere.
To stop spread of communism. I don't want to see communism spread all over the world, but nothing I can do about it. Just stay here and do my time, which I'm gonna do. Get out of Vietnam, go back to the world.
I couldn't see any purpose in the war back home. It never explained to me why we're actually here. And I really had nothing against these people. I want to kill them. And you go out in the woods and they'll shoot at you first. You'll see them, they'll shoot you if they get the chance. You have to shoot at them first. It's really bad. I still don't know why I'm here. That's God's truth.
That was Shostakovich Suite, and then followed by the opening of the Quiet Mutiny, Vietnam, the Quiet Mutiny. And we are joined by John Pilger, the producer, the director, the writer, and the narrator of that great film, which I've seen about 9 times in the last 24 hours. Welcome back, John, to Live on the Fly.
Very good to be back, Randy. Good to see you.
Well, that film, I got to tell you something. It really is relevant. It hasn't lost its relevancy over the last, and it's 52 years ago. 52 years ago, when you went back to Vietnam and did this for the Daily Mirror. That was your very first film, and when you look back at it now, does it amaze you that you were able to get into that area where all of these grunts were complaining about being over there?
Yes and no, Randy. It was a time when the US Army in Vietnam was really falling apart. I mean, there were whole divisions that were inoperable, chaotic. So it wasn't difficult to get to places, but it's interesting that the actual story of the US military disintegrating and why it was disintegrating wasn't told. There was plenty of good reporting from Vietnam, but the fact that soldiers, as I show in the film, were, they call them grunts, conscripted, drafted soldiers, were shooting their officers, unpopular officers, in the back, or fragging them by throwing grenades into their hooches, into their sleeping quarters, because with each of them on a one-year tour in Vietnam, one thing mattered only, and that was staying alive. And they didn't want to go out into long-range patrols. They didn't want to confront the enemy. They didn't want to fight the war. And you must remember the young men I interview in the film are straight from what was called the Chicago generation. That's referring to the Chicago National Convention, the Democratic Convention, which was almost in open revolt. And that was really in August '68. And that was the epicenter of the revolution, in a sense, that was going on in the United States then. So these drafted men came from that background of really powerful dissent. So that by the time they got to Vietnam and stepped off the plane, they were hostile. There was very little gung-ho among them. There was still among the enlisted men, whom they called the lifers, of course. But among the drafted men, there was a real palpable sense of rebellion. And that's what I tried to reflect in the film.
Well, it's a good point to actually play the clip here, you talking to several grunts here towards the middle of the film. This is from Vietnam, The Quiet Mutiny.
The grunts are dying.
At a level acceptable to both the American military and the American public. Another 65 this week, about the same next week, and the next, and the next, until the very last American division, combat division, is withdrawn. And so far, for all the words from Washington, only paper soldiers have gone home. The war isn't over, but it is ending. It is ending not because of the Paris talks or the demonstrations at home. It is ending because the largest and wealthiest and most powerful organization on earth, the American Army, is being challenged from within, from the very cellars of its pyramid, from the most forgotten, the most brutalized, and certainly the bravest of its members. The war is ending because the grunt is taking no more bullshit.
I just don't like, I just can't take too much pressure from the Army, you know.
What happens to an unpopular officer out in the field?
Mostly unpopular officers, from what I heard, if they mess with a grunt too much, they get shot out there.
A friend of mine, captain, kind of got shot in the back.
What was he doing? What was the captain doing? to deserve
Well,
being
from
shot?
from what my friend said, he was telling them just go on through, and well, they were getting hit pretty bad, and he was telling them just keep on going. They said no. He kind of got shot.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of mistakes, but you know, the grunts don't always do what the captain says, you know. We got the captain will stay back. He'll tell a platoon or something to go out so many 100 meters, you know. We don't do it. We only go as far as we get out of sight, sit down, and come back in. We don't want to hit contact. That's one thing we don't want to hit.
Okay, so these guys were rather blunt and open with you. It just startles me that they would be that candid. Were you startled at all?
Well, they were candid, and the only concession they made to not being candid was, and there are several interviews there in it, where they referred to somebody in the third person as having, I heard that this guy shot this officer. Well, in fact, it was that guy who shot the officer. So they didn't actually say, I shot an officer on camera, but they did. And it was very widespread. And I spent quite a lot of time in Vietnam. I first went to Vietnam in '66. I was there right till the last day in '75, on and off, of course, not all the time. And this film was made in 1970. So again, that's probably, from memory, when the US Army was in Vietnam in its greatest numbers, up to 500,000 men. Completely unwieldy organization. Its leader, Westmoreland, was an incompetent general, incompetent at almost every level. The organization of this huge army dropped into an Asian country was appalling. And it was evident to many of the so-called grunts, the young men who came in that extraordinary period in the late 60s, that they shouldn't be there, that they had nothing against these people. So that was really what the Quiet Mutiny was about. The reaction to the Quiet Mutiny was the thing that surprised me. I thought, well, you know, this is clearly the situation. The film reflects it. But everything hit the fan when it was broadcast, network in Britain first. It was made by Granada Television and broadcast at peak time at night. And the US Embassy, the US ambassador then, was a man called Walter Annenberg, who was a big media mogul and a personal friend of the then president, Richard Nixon. He complained directly to the regulation authorities in Britain, and who agreed with him. In fact, one of them told a Granada executive, "What are you doing with that communist Pilger saying all that stuff?" Because that didn't work, of course. The film was absolutely factually copper-bottomed, as we say. It was a piece of investigation that told the truth, that the authorities, be they the regulation authorities, the government in the UK, certainly the government in the US, did not like. And after that film, well, it opened a dam broke then of all the other stories of rebellious troops of troops shooting their officers and troops refusing to go into battle. So it was something of a landmark film, but it was my first experience with the power of television. I was a newspaper correspondent. I had no idea of the kind of instantaneous reaction. The television in those days, you've got to remember, there wasn't this great range of television, not even cable. It was all free to air. There were in the UK, there was maybe 4 or 5 main free to air channels, and this was one of the main ones. The same with the US, where television was dominated by the networks. So I took it had this huge reaction. I took it to the US, where clearly I wanted it shown, and I went to CBS and I met Mike Wallace, and I told him about it, and he said, let's go and see it. So the two of us went to a viewing theater in CBS, and he sat down with me, and I think there were 1 or 2 of his colleagues there, and you could hear their teeth being sucked as it went through. And at the end of it, he turned to me and he said, "That's amazing. That's an amazing film." I said, "Great. When do you think you can put it on?" "Not possible." "What? Why not?" He said, "They won't buy it. It just won't happen here." He was very straight, and I respected this. And it was shown in various affiliates throughout the country over a few years, but it was never broadcast on network television.
It's an amazing piece of work. It was 1970. You had not been there for a few years, 3 years, you say. You had moved to New York, and you saw the demonstrations in Chicago. You were there when Bobby Kennedy was shot in the Ambassador Hotel. I lived 10 miles away, and I shook his hand the day before. I got expelled from school because it was on TV. So you really got to see the kind of mass movement that was going on against war. My cousin was drafted, and in 1970, in Fort Ord, he had radicalized his platoon inside the barracks at Fort Ord. He ended up being dishonorably discharged. He was put in the stockade, and everybody was carrying Free Billy Smith signs, who was charged with fragging an officer at that time. A group picture. Angela Davis inside the barracks. It was amazing. He brought Jane Fonda.
A lot of that's right. A lot of these barracks, you think you're entering some Quaker hall or something, because or Black Panthers meeting place. Because the posters everywhere, as you say, Angela Davis and Che Guevara, and anyway, the guys had them all, had the peace sign on their helmets. And I mean, when I went out in long range patrol, particularly with in the film where it shows, because I'd had some experience with seeing combat there, everyone had a joint. Everyone was smoking.
You saw that.
And I was worried about this because, we're going through the jungle. They're talking too loudly. And I said to the crew, we're holding back. We're not, these are the soldiers. We're going to stand back because otherwise we're going to be sitting ducks.
Right.
The people I was with survived, thank goodness.
Yeah.
We weren't attacked, not on that day. We were later on. We were on the small forward base called Snuffy.
Right.
And that was attacked several times by North Vietnamese regular troops. And it's just a small miracle they didn't overwhelm it. I don't think they were trying. There just wasn't any will. Extraordinary to see an army. I mean, I'm sure it's happened throughout history so many times, the collapse of a will of an army. And of course, it was replicated 5 years later when the war finally came to an end, and the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, which is vaguely a US puppet army, the soldiers simply climbed out of their uniform, climbed out of their boots, and walked off. And there were streets throughout Saigon, Da Nang, and the other cities of boots and clothes. An army had disintegrated before our eyes. As far as the US Army concerned, they weren't doing that, but they'd, in terms of their will to fight, it had gone. I mean, even the enlisted senior officers, colonel, some majors, certainly colonels, they weren't around. They're in the officers' club or something, you know. They drop you off at a place and then fly away, you know. And there were whole hotels in Saigon where they lived with their, quote, temporary wives, who, that's what they were called, because Vietnamese women. It was a corrupt, the whole awful mess was corrupt, and it's just a tragedy. It didn't end earlier.
Yes, I know you said it was back then. It was a precursor. There's a harbinger of it ending, but it lasted 4 more years. You had the Ellsberg revelations. That didn't bring it to an end. What I wanted to ask you was, going through that experience, the years that you spent in Vietnam, and then Snuffy, of course, we played that clip of you at, I guess it's a Fort Snuffy. But how much did that early experience and then up 70 and when you went back shaped your direction, your trajectory as a journalist and as a filmmaker?
Well, it had a huge effect. I mean, when I first went to Vietnam, I didn't know what it was about. I knew something of the colonial history of the French, that this used to be a French colony, but I knew very little. You know, I was in my early 20s, and I was finding out almost everything about the world as I went along. And although the term then wasn't used, but learning curve for me was so steep, because some of the first things I witnessed in Vietnam was the napalm attack on villages. So I witnessed a lot of victims of this, and its impact was huge. So the why is this happening? The why is still left out of journalism, or a prejudicial why is embedded in it. But I wanted to know why. So it had a big change, to answer your question, Randy. It showed me, it taught me something I knew a little about, I must say, but the impact of a massive imperial force. This was imperialism in its essence in Vietnam.
But, you know, you had the compliant mainstream media giving you one side, and then you had yourself. And you kind of, being with the Daily Mirror, it wasn't like it was some alternative media. It was like one of the biggest newspapers in the UK. And you were able to get these stories written. Today, when I look back over the last 20 years and before that, could you get away with that? Let's take a look at the Iraqi invasion. Could you get away with giving the other side, rather than the embedded journalists, I want to call them journalists, giving the US side?
Well, no, not today. In fact, the invasion of Iraq was the last time I did, because I worked for the Daily Mirror for 21 years. Then I came back to it. One particular editor asked me to come back at the start of the Afghanistan invasion, which then overlapped into the Iraq invasion. So I was able to write in the early 2000s about what was happening. But I would think in the last 10 years, yes, that space that was open to me, or a space that I certainly made my own, but I had a lot of support, especially my newspaper always ran very prominently its my reports. That space that was open for me and for other people. In other words, well, not dissenting voices, but for maverick journalism. It was journalism that was going against the grain. It was anti-establishment journalism. But in those days, the 60s, that even the mainstream media had these spaces for people. And so you get very right-wing newspapers, like, for instance, in London, the London Evening Standard, which was owned by Lord Beaverbrook. Its foreign correspondent was a great radical journalist called James Cameron. Now, all those spaces are gone. In the last 10 years, they dried up. In 2014, my last newspaper space, if you like, I was writing a column for The Guardian, one a fortnight, they were half page. I was sacked. I was called and told that was it. Interestingly, I'd just been writing then about Russia, and it was the time of the events in Ukraine, and I was suggesting that this was not as they appeared, that it was a coup. Whether or not that played directly on this, I don't know, but that's something in previous times I could, excuse me, I could write about very freely, but it was over. And since then, since 2014, so we're looking at 6-8 years, all my journalism has been either in television, certainly. I've made a number of documentaries, but as far as my written journalism is concerned, it's all been on the net. The mainstream has closed, and it's closed to people like me. The Guardian has got rid of some very fine investigative people. They're not wanted anymore. Yeah.
We're talking with John Pilger on Random Critical. This is Random Critical Live on the Fly. John Pilger, author of 15 books, the producer, director of and narrator of 61 films, the most recent, The Dirty War on the NHS. Just one more question or two about the Vietnam Quiet Mutiny. What is your biggest takeaway from that experience, that first film, and all of the ramifications around it?
Well, I think my biggest takeaway was that one of the most abiding curses of the world and of our time is imperialism. I rarely use that term because it used to be a kind of agitprop, activist term, but it's a correct term. And that is the imposition of great power on lesser powers in order to secure resources or strategic position or whatever. I'm not wholly anti-war. There are some wars, unfortunately, that perhaps had to be fought. Yes. But that's my takeaway. It is this all-consuming power, military power, cultural power, political power, economic power of great imperial states. And we need first to come to terms with that and recognize it, and then oppose it. That's my view. That's what I've come away with.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, musical break, 30 seconds. We'll be right back with the great John Pilger. Okay, I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly. We are continuing our discussion with John Pilger on some of his films. Hopefully, we can do a multi-part series because there's such a beautiful library of film making here, which is ensconced at the British Library. It's archived there. And I want to turn to one of your more recent films, and that is, it's a very scary film, and that is The Coming War on China. And it looks like we may have a coming war with Russia, but that film is very germane right now when you take a look at it and what's going on between the U.S. and China. Do you feel that we are at an existential moment, the human race, because of this escalation of tension with China alone, let alone Russia?
Yes, I do. That film was made in 2016. And when I wrote the title, admittedly, I thought, and a number of my colleagues said, that's quite provocative. And I don't speculate a lot, but I thought, let it be provocative. Let's understand that this is a possible danger. Now, I don't think it's provocative. I think it's, whether or not it's a fact, I can't say. I'm not a futurist. I certainly hope not. But the baiting and the provocation of China, as indeed there has been, and we have the cost of that now being played out before us, of Russia, is something that really we have to come to terms with, though its consequences hardly bear thinking about. And especially together, China and Russia, as they are, even with this Ukraine invasion. China and Russia are a new alliance. So the great imperial power of the world, the United States, is no longer the only one. And that is almost impossible, in my experience, for the US to accept. So where it goes with China, I don't know. I know that China is extremely careful that it doesn't give, if you like, the United States an excuse. It's careful about Taiwan. I can't see China attacking Taiwan. I think Taiwan will eventually be taken into China, but I can't see it happening. So China is incredibly careful about potential flashpoints, but they exist, they're there. And we've seen what's happened in Ukraine, that a flashpoint, as Ukraine was, has erupted. So that could happen elsewhere.
Definitely could. I'm thinking about what's his name? Schutz's book, On the Beach, and what could happen. But instead of bringing that up, let me go to one of the individuals that was interviewed several times in this film, and that is Eric Lee. And he has to say, first of all, about the difference between their system in China and our system. I'm going to play that first, and then I want to play another. This is what he says between capitalism, controlling the politics here, and the politics controlling the capitalism in China. All right, let me just play that clip.
Now in China, there are a lot of problems, but at the moment, the Chinese, the party state, has proven an extraordinary ability to change. I mean, I make the joke how in America, you can change political parties, but you can't change the policies. In China, you cannot change the party, but you can change policies. So in the 65 or 66 years, China is being run by one single party, yet the political changes that have taken place in China in this past 66 years have been wider and broader and greater than probably any other major country in modern memory.
So in that time, China ceased to be communist. Is that what you're saying?
Well, China is a market economy, and it's a vibrant market economy, but it is not a capitalist country. Here's why. There's no way a group of billionaires could control the Politburo as billionaires control American policymaking. So in China, you have a vibrant market economy, but capital does not rise above political authority. Capital does not have enshrined rights. In America, capital, the interest of capital and capital itself has risen above the American nation. The political authority cannot check the power of capital. And that's why America is a capitalist country, but China is not.
All right. He is a remarkable individual. You learn a lot in this film. There's so many misperceptions and conceptions about China and the history. People don't know the history.
Yeah. Well, it's not only that. It's just it's that, but it's interviewing people. What struck me, I made that film. The crew and I turned up with ordinary visitors' visas. We had no problem making the film. We went to see officials, and they granted us interviews. And the thing that struck me is, why haven't I heard from all these people? Why are these people being interviewed by a major television company for the first time? And I think there's a number of answers to that. One, the media in official enemies like China is a club with the wagons drawn around it. But I mean, that aside, it was just illuminating. I hadn't been to China since the year after Mao died. And when I was in China, it was a silent place. Beijing, or Peking, as it then was dark. It was, the only sound you could hear was that of bicycle bells. Amazing when you look at it today. But the universities were still closed. It was coming out of that whole cultural revolution, that dark Mao, the latter years of Mao Zedong. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw China. And I could also, what was struck me was, and this sounds slightly trite, but it's not, I think. It's a legitimate impression. How satisfied people were in China. You know, they all had a memory of what life was like before the great rise of China. China rose in just under a generation. As Eric Lee says, there's never been anything like it probably in human history. So everybody's got a memory of what it was like before, and they're happy with what it's like now. That was very striking. The modernity of China, the openness of China, within limits, of course. It's, you know, the state is very powerful, and if you're a dissident, you can be clamped down on. No question about that. But generally speaking, I was stopping people in the street with a camera. I couldn't believe I could do this, asking their opinion. The only time I stopped was it all looked very serious, and I stopped the cameraman and said, "What's this about?" And he said, "Well, you're filming the Starbucks sign, and I haven't asked my manager." This person was from the Starbucks coffee shop. "I hadn't asked my manager for permission to film the Starbucks sign." And that was the extent of the censorship of making that film. I only tell that story because the last time I saw China, it was consumed by censorship, if you like. The world knew nothing about what was going on in China. So the powerhouse of China is the threat, of course, the economic powerhouse of China. Sadly, that is being modified, if you like, by US hostility, Western hostility, or UK-US hostility to China. So that China has, Russia did recently, has, it used to have its nuclear weapons, according to the literature in the United States, on low alert. Doesn't want to fight anybody, is getting used to the idea that it might have to fight somebody. That's very, very tragic.
I don't know how it would start and end in a conventional, warfare type of plane here. You bring up you call the noose around China. There are nuclear weapons everywhere. Australia says they don't have any, but they're on the lily pads there. These things that kind of pop up. Another one, and we're going to play this clip, is in the Jeju Island off of South Korea. And let's play that clip.
A semi-tropical sanctuary of unusual beauty, Jeju Island is a World Heritage Site. The government of South Korea declared it an island of world peace. But on this island of peace has been built one of the most provocative military bases in the world, less than 400 miles from Shanghai. Like Okinawa and the Marshall Islands, this is America's front line in its so-called pivot to Asia. Here in once unspoiled Ganjung village, the South Korean Navy has built a base for American aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and destroyers equipped with the Aegis ballistic missile aimed at China's defenses. China's lifelines to the world in oil, trade, resources, depend on shipping that comes through choke points like this.
The U.S. pivot into the Asia Pacific is really intended to create the ability to put a loaded gun to the head of China and say, you know, you will do as we say, otherwise we will be able to restrict, we will be able to shut down, choke off your importation of oil and other resources.
All right, so there you go. That was a remarkable interview you had with those people that protest. And it's not a protest, it's a kind of a vigil by those Catholic priests and nuns.
Yeah, well, you know, in South Korea, which is quite an authoritarian state in many ways, the church, the Catholic Church especially, has great power, and the state dare not touch it. And those people protesting in Jeju had the power of the church behind them. So there's a whole interesting coalition of forces right throughout that great arc of states that recognize that they may be swept up in or be platforms for a war on China. And, you know, I mean, China has, which is almost unknown in the West, but there they are, it has 400 US bases surrounding it. Australia, all the way up to through the Pacific Islands, through the Philippines, through Thailand, up into Japan and Korea, and part of and Jeju, of course, there are proxy bases there, but on Okinawa is one big marine base, effectively. It's an island of fences. The sheer provocation, and this is, you know, Okinawa is about 300 or 400 miles from the great industrial belt of Shanghai. The sheer provocation is something that is so dangerous.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Okinawa situation where during the missile crisis of '62, all weapons, all the nuclear weapons were like pointed towards China, not anywhere else.
It's amazing when you see this. It's now this great edifice on the side of the hill with big arches, about half a dozen, about 6 arches. And this is where the missiles are launched through, straight across to China, to North Korea, and to Russia as well. And in 1962, at this particular missile base, a rogue officer gave the order to fire one of the missiles. And there's an interview, which is probably the most chilling I've used in one of my films, of one of the missileers who describes what happened and how it was stopped, how the officer was arrested, but how it could have happened is extraordinary. Now you could transplant that. That's at the height of the Cold War, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was the atmosphere in which that officer, that rogue officer, gave the orders to fire. That's why these flashpoints are so dangerous. But there it is, this great cathedral to nuclear war on the side of the hill. It's now run by a very religious organization, the Soka Gakkai, and it's a relic of the Cold War then, but it's a reminder of the new Cold War that's unfolding all around us.
So the thought of nuclear war, I think just a few, the intensity level of these weapons, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are firecrackers compared to what they have today. Here's an interview or a piece of it that you had with a physics professor from Missouri. His name is Stephen Starr.
In one exchange, nuclear exchange between the US and China, what could be the consequences?
Well, let me just give you an example of what one Chinese 4 or 5 megaton warhead would do to a city in the United States. If it got through, the detonation of that weapon over a city would instantly ignite about 600 or 700 square miles on fire. And within 20 to 30 minutes, all of those fires would coalesce into a single gigantic firestorm. There would be no escape from it, so all the people there would perish. So the U.S. with, say, hundreds of nuclear weapons on Chinese cities. Well, when you combine all the smoke from these nuclear weapons detonating, it actually creates millions of tons of smoke. Black carbon smoke will rise above cloud level into the stratosphere. It's heated by the sun. It acts like a solar collector. And that smoke, because of that, will stay there for 10 years or longer. And what the smoke does is it blocks warming sunlight from reaching the surface of the Earth. And it becomes so cold in a matter of just a couple of weeks that the temperatures will fall below freezing every day for 1 to 3 years. And it will become too cold to grow food crops for at least 10 years or longer.
That is really scary, chilling.
Yeah, very. And that's Stephen Starr's description. All of it informed, all of it correct, of a nuclear winter and what would happen, not might happen, is what awaits us if we play used in a more of a satirical sense, play with nuclear weapons. With no day for at least 10 years, no food, those of us who survive will be zombies. You mentioned earlier Neville Shute's wonderful book On the Beach. Well, he got it right. That's how it can end up. The contamination is so ubiquitous from nuclear weapons.
The name of the film is The Coming War on China. You can get it at johnpilger.com. Just go to his videos. You can get all 61 of his films. Also, a lot of interviews that he did, including one with Martha Gellhorn and many others. It's a remarkable library. Do you have a time to talk a few minutes about Julian Assange? Can I take a quick break and say goodbye to our listeners? And first, it's the very first film that we showed was The Quiet Mutiny, Vietnam, The Quiet Mutiny, and the other one, which he made nearly 50 years later, John made, is called The Coming War on China. And you can watch those two and everything in between, and I recommend that you do. I'm Randy Credico. We're going to say goodbye to our New York listeners, and we'll come right back with some closing thoughts about Julian Assange. Goodbye, New York, and we'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, we're back, John, and it's amazing. We've spoken for 40 minutes and we never mentioned Julian Assange. I've interviewed you the first time on Assange 5 years ago with him. The launch of Assange Countdown to Freedom was with you and Julian on the same show, April 11th, 2017. And it seems like his situation is no better now than it was then. Actually, it's worse.
Yes, it's worse. Julian is caught in a surreal world, a Kafkaesque world, where grotesquely the High Court in Britain allowed an American appeal against an order by the lower court that he should not be extradited to the United States. It was an utterly political decision. I was there in court. It was anybody has any vestige of faith in justice coming from our common law courts, the highest courts, and in Britain, where so much of it began, is really disabused of that now. So what's happening to it now? One appeal after the other. It's now headed towards the UK Supreme Court, but they have yet to say whether or not they will consider Julian's appeal against being extradited to the United States. If that fails, it goes back to the High Court, and those aspects of the original case that weren't the subject of an appeal, they can now appeal. So it's kind of an endless industry. It's so, to keep up with it, it really tests the intellect. I tell you, it's most basic. I find myself calling up or emailing Julian's principal lawyer, Gareth Pierce, and say, where are we now, Gareth? What, I've forgotten. What's next? And I'm sure she knows, but she will then explain it to me. So we're into a whole rolling caravan of courts and appeals. This alone could last a year or two, while Julian languishes in Belmarsh prison. You know, we know from the evidence, the very vivid and graphic and sad evidence, searing evidence of the year before last at the Old Bailey in London, of the consequences of him being locked up. We know that he started to disregard his own life, and we know that his intellect, his sense of the world, his just sense of humanity was so powerfully impacted by what was happening to him in prison. There was lots of evidence from experts about having examined Julian. He'd been tortured, of course. What's happening to him now is torture. Nils Melzer, the UN reporter on torture, has identified it as that. So Julian has a lot of that here. That said, I haven't seen him for some time now, but I understand that he's engrossed in the case. So I know that will absorb him, because his intellectual application to all the arcane judgments and the court proceedings and so on will give him some satisfaction. But, you know, how long can the resilience of this man hold out? I don't know, Randy. It's so worrying.
You know, it was bad enough the 7 or 8 years he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, which I saw him 3 times, and you many more times, and then going into this hellhole, into this maximum security prison for 3 years, unable to do anything, write, do any kind of communications outside of that cell. One of the most brilliant individuals I've ever met is being suppressed on so many levels. And that is a psychological torture in and of itself.
Yeah. Yes, and here we are, we're talking about, countries that we accuse of abusing human rights. Hardly any of them can compare with what has been done to Julian Assange, because it's been done with a disguise, the disguise of legitimacy. It's not legitimate, it's crude. The torture of Julian Assange, the destruction of him. It comes straight from Orwell, it comes straight from some of the worst dictatorial states we've known in modern history. So that this is happening 5 or 6 miles from the heart of London, in the land of the Magna Carta, is such a disgrace.
It really is. And I just don't, we've gone through this so many times. I don't know what else to add that's new here, other than it's really a shame. All those people, I look at these prosecutors, and then I think of those that died at Dunkirk, and died in the Battle of Britain, and died in the Battle of Crete, and died in Anzio, like Roger Waters' father, and in North Africa, gave up their lives to fight against fascism, fight against fascism. And now what they're doing is desecrating the memory and the graves of those that gave their lives to preserve some sense of democracy.
Yeah, but what they're doing is fascist. This fascist got nothing to do with justice. It's deliberate, it's callous, it's cruel, it's in every way fascist, literally fascist.
Yes. And finally, what do we do now? I mean, I just had an event in DC. I did some kind of entertainment event on his behalf, and then I stood in front of the DOJ. We've done things in front of the British Embassy here. I continue to do Assange Countdown to Freedom, and you're doing what you do, and people do it. What do we do now? I mean, how do we maintain our energy? And
it's very difficult, isn't it? It's very difficult because we can't go and spree him. We can't get him out. It's not possible. But we can continue to let him know that there are many, many people, I would say millions, who support him and who are with him, and who are also saying to the authorities who are doing this to him, and may even do worse to him, that even for them, there will be a price to pay. So we've got to keep doing what you've been doing consistently, and what others have been doing. No matter how repetitive it is, we've got to keep doing it.
Right. Well, I'm going to close on that note, and we will continue to do that. John Pilger, war correspondent, journalist, author of 15 books, and the producer of 61 wonderful documentaries, films that you can see at johnpilger.com. You can follow him on Twitter, and he gets more retweets than anybody that I know, and that's at John Pilger. So I recommend that you follow him and see what he has to say. You don't come out every day, but when you say something, man, it has a big impact. And we're going to go out. We talked about 2 films today. One, The Quiet Mutiny, and the other, of course, The Coming War on China. And at the very end of it, the credits roll, and Vera Lynn is singing. And I know it has something to do with Dr. Strangelove, right?
Oh.
And
well, it's taken from that brilliant film by Stanley Kubrick,
Dr. Strangelove. Yes.
And he played Vera Lynn, We'll Meet Again. the most searingly ironic words at the end of a film, just after, in the last scene, as you may remember, the US B-52 has just dropped a nuclear bomb on Russia, and then it goes to "we'll meet again." It's one of the most powerful things. So I suppose it's a tribute to that film, to Kubrick, and I spoke to Stanley. I was in touch with Stanley Kubrick some years ago, but I spoke to his widow about this and asked her to watch it. So I hope it carries just a little of the enormous power that the original film, Dr. Strangelove, had.
Yeah, Slim Pickens riding it all the way down to the end of the world, right, on that nuclear bomb. Right. All right, we're going to play out with Vera Lynn. This is, I guess it's the same version, the same music that in the coming war on China at the end as it was in the end of Dr. Strangelove. Thank you very much, John. Look forward to doing this again and talk about other films. There's so much there. All right. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly. At this point, it is Assange Countdown to Freedom, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue